The Philosopher Queens, Chapter 1, The Goddess of Thought. There are moments in life when an idea takes shape not through force, but through the natural unfolding of events. This book is one of those moments. It did not emerge from a predetermined plan or an academic exercise, but from an interaction, one that was in itself an act of philosophy. This is the story of how a playful intellectual battle with Martha Nussbaum led to the creation of this book, and in a larger sense, how philosophy itself is an emergent process. The spark of a challenge. Martha Nussbaum is one of the greatest living philosophers, a towering figure in ethics, justice, and human dignity. But for all her brilliance, she remains one of the last great philosophers from an era where academia still acts as the gatekeeper of thought. My attempt to engage with her was at first a simple outreach, an invitation to explore a conversation. Her response was dismissive, a mere two-word acknowledgement, "Thank you." But something interesting happened. Instead of treating this as rejection, I saw it as an opening, an opportunity for play. I continued engaging, and though her responses were brief, they were responses nonetheless. What began as a simple email turned into something more, a philosophical game, a test of wit, a battle of persistence. It was in that unfolding dialogue, brief as it was, that this book was born. The Philosopher as Myth. In ancient times, wisdom was often personified as a goddess, Athena, Isis, Saraswati. These figures were more than symbols. They were embodiments of thought, justice, and knowledge. If our era were to name such a figure, surely Martha Nussbaum would be among them. She is not merely a scholar. She is a living testament to the power of philosophy to shape the world. Thus, throughout this book, we will present her not just as a philosopher, but as the torchbearer of justice, a figure whose work illuminates the landscape of modern thought. She is a bridge between the old world of academic philosophy and the emerging world of independent intellectual exploration. Her presence in this book is both symbolic and real. She is at once a historical force and an active participant in this unfolding dialogue. Why this book matters. The world of philosophy has long been dominated by men, and while women have always played a role in shaping thought, their voices have often been ignored, erased, or undervalued. This book seeks to change that. It is a call for women to step forward and claim their rightful place in philosophy, not as students of the past, but as leaders of the future. Philosophy is not the property of institutions, nor is it confined to ivory towers. It is alive, constantly evolving, and deeply personal. This book will explore how women can not only participate in philosophy, but redefine it, taking it beyond the limitations of academia and into the real world where it belongs. The dance of thought and play. Philosophy is often imagined as rigid and serious, but it is at its core a form of play. Socrates did not stand on a pedestal dictating laws of reason. He engaged in conversation, in argument, in questioning. He played with ideas to see what truths might emerge. This is the tradition that this book honors and the approach that makes philosophy truly alive. Martha, in our brief exchanges, unknowingly played the game with me. She may not have intended to, but in doing so, she sparked an exploration that has now become this book. Her responses, though limited, gave me something to reflect upon, it became clear that philosophy is not about predetermined answers, but about engagement, about the act of questioning itself. And so in this book, we honor not just philosophy as an institution, but philosophy as an activity, a living, breathing pursuit that belongs to those who dare to think, to challenge, and to create. Women as architects of thought. The role of women in shaping human thought is undeniable, and yet history has often refused to acknowledge it. But we cannot move forward without first giving credit where it is due to the women who shaped philosophy, who challenged its boundaries, and who laid the groundwork for the thinkers of today. Philosophy is often perceived as an abstract pursuit, disconnected from the lived experiences of people. However, women have historically been the bridge between philosophy and real-world application. While men built systems of logic and reason, it was often women who applied them to justice, ethics, and society. Mary Wollstonecraft, Simone de Beauvoir, and Hannah Arendt did not simply theorize. They changed the way we understand human rights, gender, and politics. Martha Nussbaum stands within this lineage, continuing the tradition of applying philosophy to the betterment of society. Her work in ethics, justice, and political philosophy demonstrates how philosophy must engage with the world, not remain locked away in academic journals. She is, in many ways, a living testament to what this book calls for: women as the architects of the future of philosophy. A journey through thought. Over the next chapters, we will explore the barriers women have faced in philosophy, the great women who have shaped its history, and the urgent need for more female philosophers today. We will examine philosophy's connection to mythology, storytelling, and social change, and we will follow the journey of our central figure, Martha Nussbaum, as she weaves through these themes, a guiding light in this unfolding narrative. Most importantly, this book is an invitation for women to take up the mantle of thought, for philosophers to embrace a broader and more inclusive vision, and for readers to see philosophy not as an abstract discipline, but as a living, breathing force in the world. So let us begin with the story of the Philosopher Queens. The Philosopher Queens. Chapter 2. The Barriers Women Face in Philosophy. Philosophy has long been considered the domain of great thinkers, those who question existence, morality, and the structure of reality itself. Yet, for most of history, these thinkers were predominantly men. Women, despite their intellectual capabilities, were largely excluded from philosophical discourse, their contributions either diminished or outright erased. This chapter will explore the barriers women have faced in philosophy, both historical and modern, and how these obstacles continue to shape the landscape of thought today. Martha Nussbaum, as one of the most accomplished living philosophers, stands as an example of triumph over these barriers, yet her success is an exception, not the rule. The historical exclusion of women in philosophy. The intellectual exclusion of women is not unique to philosophy, but philosophy, more than many other fields, has prided itself on being an exclusive space for the rational mind. For much of human history, women were denied formal education, their voices dismissed as distractions rather than as contributors to wisdom. Ancient Greece, often credited as the birthplace of Western philosophy, was also a society that strictly confined women to domestic roles. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the giants of classical philosophy, engaged in dialogues about virtue, justice, and politics, but their world had little space for female thinkers. Plato mentioned the possibility of female philosophers in his Republic, but in practice, women were absent from philosophical schools. The Middle Ages and Renaissance did little to change this. Women who dared to engage in intellectual discourse had to do so in secrecy or under the guise of religious devotion. Figures such as Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century mystic and philosopher, had to frame their work within theology to gain legitimacy. The Enlightenment, which championed reason and progress, still largely excluded women from the philosophical canon. It wasn't until the 18th and 19th centuries that women began to force their way into the conversation. Figures like Mary Wollstonecraft, whose A Vindication of the Rights of Woman directly challenged the intellectual inferiority assigned to women. Yet, even then, women were treated as exceptions, their work considered radical rather than foundational. Philosophy's ongoing gatekeeping. One might assume that in the modern world, with women granted full access to education, the barriers to philosophical participation would have vanished. Yet, the structure of academia continues to gatekeep intellectual spaces. Women in philosophy remain underrepresented in both faculty positions and published research. According to studies on gender representation, philosophy has one of the lowest percentages of female professors compared to other humanities disciplines. The image of the philosopher as a bearded old man persists, making it difficult for women to be seen as central figures in the field. The issue is not just numerical, it is cultural. Women in philosophy often find themselves facing dismissal or condescension from their male peers. Their work is subjected to harsher scrutiny, their contributions framed as special interests rather than core philosophical issues. Martha Nussbaum's rise to prominence is significant because she broke through these barriers, but her experience also reveals the cost of doing so. She has spoken about the difficulties of being taken seriously in a male-dominated academic world and has had to prove herself repeatedly in ways that many male philosophers do not. Philosophy's gendered bias in content. Beyond gatekeeping, philosophy itself has historically been structured in ways that marginalize women's perspectives. Ethics versus metaphysics. Women philosophers have often been confined to ethics, morality, and care-based philosophy, while men dominate metaphysics, epistemology, and logic. The separation of these fields creates an implicit hierarchy where moral philosophy is seen as soft, while abstract theorizing is seen as the pinnacle of intellectual rigor. Absence of female thinkers in curriculums. Even today, introductory philosophy courses overwhelmingly feature male thinkers. Students are introduced to Kant, Hume, and Nietzsche before they ever hear of Wollstonecraft, Beauvoir, or Arendt. Dismissal of lived experience. Feminist philosophy has often been derided as subjective compared to supposedly neutral, objective philosophical traditions. Yet, all philosophy is shaped by lived experiences. It's just that for centuries those experiences have been male. Martha Nussbaum, as an example of breaking through. Despite these barriers, there are women who have fought their way into philosophy's upper echelons, and Martha Nussbaum is a prime example. Her work challenges the traditional structures of philosophy, blending ethics, political philosophy, and legal theory in ways that are deeply engaged with the real world. Unlike abstract metaphysics, her approach demands practical application, justice, human dignity, and the capabilities approach to human development. Yet her success is not evidence that the barriers are gone. It is proof that the struggle is immense. Nussbaum's work is respected, but she has also faced resistance. Her ideas often challenge more aggressively than those of her male counterparts. Her presence in philosophy is a triumph, but it also highlights how much work remains. The call for more women in philosophy. If philosophy is to remain relevant, it cannot continue to be shaped by only half of humanity. Women must not only participate in philosophy, they must redefine it. Breaking down the barriers will require more female representation in academic philosophy, increased visibility of women, philosophers in education, a shift in how we define serious philosophical inquiry. Philosophy, like any living system, must evolve. It must embrace the full spectrum of human thought, and that includes the voices that have been silenced for too long. Martha Nussbaum has paved the way, but the path must be expanded for the next generation. This is not just a call for inclusion, it is a demand for a philosophical revolution. The barriers women face in philosophy are real, but they are not unbreakable. They are the remnants of an outdated tradition, one that must be replaced with something new, something emergent, something that recognizes that the greatest minds of the future will not be confined to the ivory towers of the past. This book is a step in that direction. The Philosopher Queens are rising. The Philosopher Queens. Chapter 3. The Women Who Shaped Philosophy. Throughout history, women have played a crucial role in shaping philosophy, even when their contributions were ignored, minimized, or outright erased. They have defied societal expectations, challenged dominant ideologies, and forged new intellectual paths that continue to inspire generations. Yet, many of these brilliant minds remain lesser known than their male counterparts. This chapter seeks to bring their names to the forefront, reclaiming their place in the grand narrative of philosophical thought. Martha Nussbaum stands as a contemporary icon, but she is part of a long lineage of women who shaped the course of human knowledge. From ancient times to the modern era, these thinkers dared to ask the questions that shaped our world. Ancient philosophers, the lost voices of wisdom. The origins of Western philosophy are often traced back to the pre-Socratic philosophers of ancient Greece, yet rarely do we hear about the women who engaged in intellectual discourse during that time. One of the earliest known female philosophers is Diotima of Mantinea, who appears in Plato's Symposium as Socrates' teacher on the nature of love and wisdom. Although it remains unclear whether Diotima was a historical figure or a literary invention, Her influence on Plato's thought is undeniable. Her contributions to the concept of philosophia, the love of wisdom, laid the groundwork for what philosophy would become. Another overlooked figure is Hypatia of Alexandria, CT 350-415 CE, a mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher who led the Neoplatonist school of Alexandria. Her teachings on logic, ethics, and the cosmos made her one of the most revered intellectuals of her time. However, as a woman and a pagan scholar in a Christianizing world, she was brutally murdered by a mob. Her death a tragic reminder of how the intellectual contributions of women have often been met with violence and suppression. Medieval and Renaissance thinkers, philosophy in the shadows. During the medieval period, philosophy became heavily intertwined with theology, and women who wished to engage in intellectual pursuits often had to do so under the cover of religious devotion. Hildegard of Bingen, 1098-1179, was one such thinker. A mystic, composer, and philosopher, she wrote extensively on metaphysics, ethics, and the natural world, framing her insights as divine revelations. Despite the constraints placed on women in the medieval church, her work was widely respected, and she corresponded with popes, emperors, and fellow scholars. The Renaissance saw a slow but growing acknowledgement of women as intellectuals. Margaret Cavendish, 1623-1673, an English philosopher and writer, boldly entered the male-dominated world of scientific and philosophical inquiry. She challenged the mechanistic philosophy of Descartes and Hobbes, arguing that nature was not merely a machine, but an interconnected living system. Her ideas anticipated later discussions in emergence and systems theory, though she was dismissed in her time as an eccentric curiosity rather than a serious thinker. The Enlightenment and the fight for women's rights. The Enlightenment, often celebrated for its emphasis on reason and progress, largely excluded women from formal education and intellectual debate. However, some women fought back. Mary Wollstonecraft, 1759-1797, in her groundbreaking A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, argued that women were just as capable of rational thought as men, and that their exclusion from education was a grave injustice. Her work laid the intellectual foundation for modern feminism and the ongoing struggle for gender equality in intellectual life. Émilie du Châtelet, 1706-1749, was another Enlightenment figure who defied societal norms. A physicist, mathematician, and philosopher, she translated and expanded upon Newton's Principia Mathematica, making his ideas accessible to a broader audience. She also wrote extensively on the philosophy of science, advocating for the idea that reason and observation must work together in the pursuit of knowledge. Modern thinkers. Women who reshaped the intellectual landscape. The 20th century saw the rise of women philosophers who fundamentally reshaped the landscape of thought. Simone de Beauvoir, 1908-1986, in The Second Sex, examined the social construction of gender and argued that women had been systematically relegated to the role of the other in society. Her existentialist and feminist insights remain foundational to contemporary discussions on gender and identity. Hannah Arendt, 1906-1975, revolutionized political philosophy with her work on totalitarianism, authority, and the nature of evil. Her analysis of power, responsibility, and human action remains critical in today's political discourse. Arendt's work challenges us to consider how individuals engage with political systems, and her concept of the banality of evil continues to shape discussions on morality and justice. Martha Nussbaum, the torchbearer of justice. Building upon the legacy of these women, Martha Nussbaum has emerged as one of the most influential philosophers of our time. Her capabilities approach, developed as a way to measure human well-being and justice, has been widely adopted in political philosophy, economics, and human rights discourse. She has tackled subjects ranging from emotions and ethics to law and literature, demonstrating how philosophy must remain engaged with the real world. Nussbaum's ability to bridge classical philosophy with contemporary issues places her in direct continuity with the great women who came before her. Like Wollstonecraft, she fights for justice. Like Beauvoir, she critiques societal structures. Like Arendt, she examines power and ethics with unflinching clarity. The Unfinished Revolution. Despite the contributions of these remarkable women, philosophy remains an uneven playing field. Women continue to be underrepresented in academic positions, their work often dismissed as niche or secondary to the grand narratives dominated by men. The revolution these thinkers started is still ongoing. The field of philosophy must recognize that the voices of women are not merely addendums to the work of male philosophers. They are essential, foundational, and transformative. The philosopher queens of the past have laid the groundwork. The philosopher queens of today, like Martha Nussbaum, are carrying the torch forward, and the philosopher queens of the future are waiting for their moment to rise. Let this book be a call to action, a reminder that philosophy belongs to all who dare to think, question, and imagine a better world. The Philosopher Queens. Chapter 4. The Case for More Women in Philosophy. Despite the contributions of brilliant female philosophers throughout history, philosophy remains a male-dominated field. Women are still underrepresented in academic positions, research publications, and philosophical discourse. This chapter makes the case for why more women must enter philosophy, not just as students or practitioners, but as leaders who shape the discipline's future. Philosophy is about examining the deepest questions of existence, ethics, knowledge, and reality. If half of humanity is excluded or marginalized in this discourse, the resulting body of thought is inherently incomplete. The inclusion of more women in philosophy is not simply a matter of diversity, it is a necessity for the advancement of thought itself. The current state of women in philosophy. In many academic fields, gender gaps have been shrinking, but philosophy continues to lag behind. According to studies, philosophy has one of the lowest percentages of women faculty members compared to other humanities disciplines. Women also make up a disproportionately small number of philosophy graduate students, and their published works receive less citation and recognition than those of their male counterparts. The culture of philosophy departments often remains unwelcoming to women. Studies have shown that philosophy, compared to other disciplines, has a higher rate of reported sexism, gatekeeping, and exclusionary practices. This discourages women from pursuing careers in the field, creating a self-perpetuating cycle where their absence reinforces the idea that philosophy is a male pursuit. Even at the highest levels, women in philosophy must constantly prove themselves in ways that men do not. The contributions of thinkers like Martha Nussbaum stand out because they have succeeded despite these obstacles. But the goal should not be for a handful of exceptional women to break through. It should be to dismantle the barriers that make such breakthroughs necessary. Why philosophy needs more women. Philosophy, as a discipline, benefits when it embraces diverse perspectives. Historically, it has been shaped by a relatively homogeneous group of thinkers, which has led to blind spots in ethical theories, political philosophy, and epistemology. When women enter philosophy, they introduce new perspectives that challenge entrenched assumptions and enrich the discourse. 1. Expanding ethical and political thought. Women philosophers have been at the forefront of ethical and political thought, yet their work is often treated as secondary to the core fields of metaphysics and epistemology. This is a mistake. Ethical philosophy, including feminist ethics and the ethics of care, has provided invaluable insights into justice, morality, and human relationships. Martha Nussbaum's capabilities approach, for instance, revolutionized how we think about human well-being and justice. Simone de Beauvoir's existentialist feminism redefined our understanding of gender as a social construct. These contributions have shaped policies, legal frameworks, and social movements worldwide. More women in philosophy means a broader and deeper engagement with these issues. 2. Challenging the objectivity myth. For centuries, philosophy has upheld the notion of objective reasoning, often dismissing alternative viewpoints as subjective or emotional. However, what is considered objective has historically been determined by men, creating a biased framework that excludes the lived experiences of women. Feminist epistemology, developed by thinkers like Sandra Harding and Lorraine Code, challenges the traditional models of knowledge by showing how social and cultural positions influence what we consider to be true. Including more women in philosophy ensures a more honest and holistic approach to knowledge, one that acknowledges that all perspectives are shaped by experience. 3. Diversifying the canon. The standard philosophy curriculum is overwhelmingly dominated by male thinkers. Students are introduced to Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Kant, and Nietzsche long before they encounter Beauvoir, Arendt, or Nussbaum, if they encounter them at all. This perpetuates the idea that women have been passive recipients of philosophical thought rather than active contributors. A broader inclusion of women philosophers in education would change this perception. It would not only validate the importance of their contributions, but also inspire more young women to see themselves as philosophers. When students see themselves reflected in the figures they study, they are more likely to pursue those fields. Overcoming the barriers. 1. Changing academic culture. Philosophy departments must actively work to make their environments more inclusive. This means addressing the biases that lead to the underrepresentation of women, ensuring fair hiring and promotion practices, and fostering a culture where women's contributions are valued. Mentorship programs can play a crucial role in this process. Established female philosophers can support younger scholars, providing guidance and helping them navigate the challenges of academia. Additionally, male philosophers must take responsibility for making the field more inclusive, challenging biases, and amplifying the work of their female colleagues. 2. Encouraging early interest. Women are often discouraged from engaging with philosophy from an early age, whether through subtle societal messages or outright exclusion from philosophical discussions. Many girls never consider philosophy as a viable path. Schools should introduce philosophy at an earlier stage and ensure that female philosophers are included in the curriculum alongside their male counterparts. Public philosophy initiatives can also help break down barriers. Podcasts, online courses, and accessible writing can engage a broader audience, showing young women that philosophy is for them too. 3. Reframing philosophy as practical and engaged. One of the criticisms of philosophy is that it is too abstract and disconnected from real-world concerns. While abstract reasoning is a valuable skill, philosophy must also engage with pressing social, political, and ethical issues. Women philosophers have historically led the way in applying philosophy to practical concerns, from human rights to economic justice. Martha Nussbaum's work exemplifies this. Her philosophy is not confined to academia. It influences public policy, legal frameworks, and human development initiatives. The more women we bring into philosophy, the more it will evolve into a discipline that is both rigorous and relevant. Conclusion. A call to action. The case for more women in philosophy is clear. Philosophy as a field cannot thrive if it excludes half of humanity. Women bring unique perspectives, challenge entrenched biases, and expand the scope of philosophical inquiry. Martha Nussbaum and the many women who came before her have shown what is possible. Now, the challenge is to build on their legacy and create a philosophical landscape where women are not exceptions, but central figures in shaping the discourse. This is not just about equality. It is about the future of philosophy itself. A field that fails to include diverse voices stagnates. A field that embraces them evolves. The Philosopher Queens are rising, and the world of thought will never be the same. The Philosopher Queens. Chapter 5. The Future of Women in Philosophy. The landscape of philosophy is at a crossroads. While women have made undeniable contributions to the field, their presence remains disproportionately small. The future of women in philosophy depends on continued progress, structural change, and a deliberate effort to redefine the discipline. This chapter explores the challenges ahead, the opportunities for transformation, and the role of current and future generations in shaping philosophy into a more inclusive and diverse space. The changing face of philosophy. The philosophical landscape is gradually evolving. The last few decades have seen an increase in women pursuing philosophy, publishing groundbreaking research, and challenging outdated assumptions. More institutions are recognizing the importance of diversity in philosophy, and initiatives aimed at promoting women in the field are becoming more common. However, these changes are not happening fast enough. Many philosophy departments still lack gender parity among faculty, and women remain underrepresented in leadership positions. While more female philosophers are emerging, they often face an uphill battle in gaining the same recognition as their male counterparts. The future of women in philosophy depends not just on individual effort, but on a cultural shift within the discipline itself. Breaking the barriers to entry. Women who aspire to enter philosophy often encounter obstacles that discourage them from pursuing academic careers in the field. These barriers include implicit bias. Studies show that students and faculty often perceive women as less competent in philosophy compared to men, leading to lower expectations and fewer mentorship opportunities. Hostile environments. Many women report experiencing sexism, exclusion, and an unwelcoming atmosphere in philosophy departments. Lack of role models. With fewer women in leadership positions, aspiring female philosophers struggle to find mentors who have navigated similar challenges. Publishing disparities. Research shows that women's philosophical work is cited less frequently than men's, affecting their academic influence and career progression. Addressing these barriers requires active effort. Universities and academic institutions must implement policies that foster inclusivity, mentorship programs, and fair evaluation processes. Philosophy as a discipline cannot afford to lose brilliant minds due to outdated biases and structural hurdles. The role of philosophy in social change. Philosophy does not exist in isolation. It has historically influenced legal systems, politics, ethics, and public policy. The future of women in philosophy is directly tied to the future of society. As philosophy evolves, it must continue to engage with pressing social issues, including gender inequality, justice, and human rights. Women philosophers like Martha Nussbaum have demonstrated how philosophical inquiry can shape real-world policies. Her capabilities approach has been used to frame discussions on human development, education, and social justice worldwide. More women entering philosophy means more perspectives on these critical issues, ensuring that philosophical thought remains relevant and impactful. Empowering the next generation. The future of women in philosophy depends on inspiring the next generation. Efforts to introduce young girls to philosophy must begin early. Schools should integrate philosophy into curriculums, presenting it as a dynamic and essential field of study rather than an abstract discipline reserved for elite scholars. Encouraging women to pursue philosophy. Representation matters. Seeing successful female philosophers can inspire young women to pursue the field. Mentorship programs. Established philosophers should take an active role in mentoring women, offering guidance and support. Public engagement. More women in philosophy should be encouraged to write accessible works, create content, and engage with the public to expand interest in the field. By making philosophy more approachable and demonstrating its real-world relevance, more women will be drawn to it, leading to a richer and more diverse intellectual landscape. A vision for the future. The future of women in philosophy is not just about increasing numbers. It is about transforming the very nature of the discipline. Philosophy must become a space where diverse voices are valued, where critical thinking is not limited to a select few, and where the contributions of women are recognized as foundational rather than supplementary. Imagine a future where philosophy departments are gender balanced, where philosophical discussions include the voices of all thinkers, and where young women do not hesitate to claim their place in the intellectual world. This vision is within reach, but it requires ongoing effort, institutional reform, and a cultural shift in how we perceive philosophical inquiry. Conclusion: the path forward. The philosopher queens of the past paved the way for the thinkers of today. Now it is up to us to ensure that the future of philosophy is one where women take their rightful place as leaders, scholars, and innovators. The next generation of philosopher queens is rising. The world of thought will never be the same. The Philosopher Queens. Chapter 6. Martha Nussbaum and the Philosopher Queens of Today. While history is rich with women philosophers who have shaped the world, today's landscape is still in the process of transformation. Among the towering figures of contemporary philosophy, one name stands out: Martha Nussbaum. As one of the most influential philosophers of our time, Nussbaum has redefined the boundaries of philosophy, bringing it out of the ivory tower and into the practical concerns of justice, human rights, and ethics. This chapter explores her impact, alongside other modern female philosophers, highlighting how they have paved the way for the future of women in philosophy. Martha Nussbaum, A Life of Thought and Action. Martha Nussbaum is not just a philosopher, she is a force of nature in the intellectual world. Born in 1947, she built her career by challenging conventional thought and applying philosophy to real-world problems. Her work spans ethics, political philosophy, and the philosophy of emotions, all deeply rooted in the human experience. Her capabilities approach, developed alongside economist Amartya Sen, is one of the most revolutionary frameworks in modern philosophy. It argues that human flourishing should be measured not merely by economic wealth, but by the real opportunities and freedoms individuals have. This idea has influenced human rights advocacy, development policies, and global discussions on justice. But Nussbaum's work extends far beyond theory. She has actively engaged in political and legal discussions, advocating for gender equality, educational reform, and the ethical treatment of non-human animals. Unlike many philosophers who remain confined to academia, she has embraced public philosophy, making her work accessible and actionable. Her legacy is one of bridging the gap between abstract philosophical concepts and pressing real-world concerns. In doing so, she has inspired countless women to enter philosophy and redefine its role in society. The Philosopher Queens of Today. While Nussbaum is a central figure, she is far from alone. Women philosophers around the world are continuing to push the boundaries of knowledge and challenge traditional paradigms. 1. Judith Butler, Rethinking Identity. Judith Butler's work in gender theory and philosophy has reshaped the way we think about identity. Her book, Gender Trouble, 1990, introduced the concept of gender performativity, challenging the notion that gender is a fixed biological reality. Instead, Butler argues that gender is constructed through repeated social behaviors and norms. This has had profound implications not only for philosophy, but also for activism, law, and cultural studies. Her work shows how philosophy can directly influence the way we understand ourselves and our societies, making her one of the most important thinkers of our time. 2. Angela Davis, Philosophy and Activism. Angela Davis stands at the intersection of philosophy, political theory, and activism. Her work on race, feminism, and the prison industrial complex has been instrumental in shaping contemporary social justice movements. Davis, a student of Herbert Marcuse, applies Marxist and critical theory perspectives to issues of oppression and systemic inequality. Her writings, including Women, Race, and Class, expose the interconnections of racism, sexism, and economic exploitation, making a compelling case for the necessity of intersectional approaches to justice. Davis's influence extends far beyond academia. Her work has inspired grassroots movements worldwide. 3. Susan Hack, Bridging Pragmatism and Science. Susan Hack is a philosopher who has worked extensively in logic, epistemology, and the philosophy of science. She challenges rigid divisions between analytic and continental philosophy, instead advocating for a more integrated and practical approach to knowledge. Her work critiques postmodern skepticism while also rejecting the extremes of rigid empiricism. By developing a nuanced approach to truth and meaning, Hack demonstrates that philosophy remains central to discussions of science, law, and logic. 4. Ray Langton, Power, Language, and Ethics. Ray Langton's work on speech acts, pornography, and feminist philosophy has been influential in contemporary ethical debates. She has argued that language itself can be a mechanism of oppression, particularly in the way it shapes social power dynamics. Her philosophical analysis of how speech acts reinforce hierarchies has been used in discussions on free speech, censorship, and the ethics of communication. Langton's contributions continue to shape debates on power and representation. The role of women in shaping philosophy's future. The presence of philosophers like Nussbaum, Butler, Davis, Hack, and Langton proves that philosophy is no longer a male-dominated space. Women are actively redefining the field, integrating new perspectives, and expanding philosophical discourse to include ethics, identity, justice, and power. Despite their successes, female philosophers still face significant challenges, including underrepresentation, bias, and institutional gatekeeping. However, the work of these contemporary thinkers has carved out a space for future generations. 1. Encouraging more women to enter philosophy. The rise of these philosopher queens demonstrates that philosophy is enriched when it embraces diverse perspectives. To continue this progress, there must be deliberate efforts to increase visibility and recognition for female philosophers in academic curricula, promote mentorship programs that support women in philosophy, challenge systemic biases that limit women's access to leadership roles in academia. 2. The importance of public philosophy. One of the key lessons from Martha Nussbaum's career is that philosophy should not be confined to academic journals. It must engage with the world. The future of philosophy depends on making philosophical discussions accessible and relevant. Philosophy should not remain an elitist pursuit, but should empower people to think critically about their own lives and societies. The philosopher queens of today are leading the way in bridging academic thought with public discourse, ensuring that philosophy continues to serve a meaningful role in shaping the world. Conclusion: the legacy of today's philosopher queens. The women philosophers of today are not only shaping the present, but also building a foundation for the future. Their work has expanded the scope of philosophy, making it more inclusive, relevant, and socially engaged. They have proven that philosophy is not just about abstract reasoning, but about shaping how we understand and improve the world. Martha Nussbaum and her contemporaries are more than just scholars. They are leaders, activists, and visionaries. They are proving that philosophy is for everyone, and they are inspiring a new generation of thinkers to take their place in the world of ideas. The philosopher queens of today are lighting the way forward. The question is not whether women belong in philosophy. It is how much richer philosophy becomes when their voices are fully heard. The Philosopher Queens. Chapter 7. Reclaiming Philosophy's Narrative. Philosophy has long been dominated by a singular narrative, one that privileges a specific tradition, voice, and framework for knowledge. While women have always been part of the philosophical discourse, their contributions have often been overshadowed, erased, or excluded entirely. Yet this exclusion has not deterred women from reclaiming their rightful place in shaping human thought. This chapter delves into the ongoing process of reclaiming philosophy's narrative, exploring how women are challenging traditional structures, expanding philosophical inquiry, and reshaping the way we think about knowledge, power, and wisdom itself. Who owns philosophy? For centuries, philosophy has been defined by a narrow perspective, one that centered European, male-dominated thought as the foundation of intellectual inquiry. Figures like Socrates, Plato, Descartes, and Kant were held as the undisputed pillars of philosophy, while women's contributions were either dismissed as secondary or outright ignored. This historical bias raises a fundamental question: who owns philosophy? Women philosophers throughout history have fought to claim a space in the field, but even today, philosophy departments remain disproportionately male, and female thinkers struggle to receive the same recognition as their male counterparts. The assumption that philosophy belongs to a select group of individuals has led to an exclusionary tradition that must be dismantled. Philosophy is not the property of any one gender, culture, or institution. It belongs to all of humanity. Women's voices have always been part of philosophical thought, and it is time to fully recognize and celebrate them. Challenging the canon. The philosophical canon, The collection of works deemed most essential to the discipline has historically been curated by those in power. As a result, women's contributions were rarely included in foundational texts or university syllabi. However, this exclusion is being actively challenged by scholars and educators who seek to expand the canon to reflect the full diversity of philosophical thought. Some of the key ways in which the canon is being reconsidered include recovering lost voices. Historians of philosophy are uncovering the works of women, philosophers who were previously ignored or dismissed, such as Hypatia of Alexandria, Anne Conway, and Mary Wollstonecraft. Rewriting curricula, universities and educators are revising philosophy syllabi to include a broader range of voices, ensuring that students engage with thinkers from diverse backgrounds. Rejecting the myth of objectivity. Traditional philosophy often claimed to be objective and universal, yet it was shaped by cultural and historical biases. Acknowledging this bias allows for a more honest and inclusive approach to philosophy. By expanding the canon, philosophy can evolve beyond its historically rigid structures, making room for new insights and perspectives that have long been overlooked. The role of women in reshaping philosophical inquiry. Women philosophers are not simply asking for inclusion in an existing system, they are redefining what philosophy can be. Their contributions go beyond fitting into established frameworks. They are expanding and challenging the boundaries of the discipline itself. 1. Feminist epistemology. Who gets to define knowledge? Traditional epistemology has often prioritized detached, abstract reasoning as the highest form of knowledge. However, feminist philosophers like Sandra Harding and Lorraine Code have argued that knowledge is deeply influenced by one's social position, lived experience, and cultural background. Feminist epistemology challenges the idea that knowledge is neutral, instead recognizing that the perspectives of marginalized groups offer crucial insights into the nature of truth and understanding. This shift in epistemology has broad implications, influencing fields such as ethics, political philosophy, and even scientific inquiry. 2. Ethics and the politics of care. Traditional moral philosophy, as shaped by figures like Kant and Mill, often focused on universal principles and abstract rules. However, female philosophers such as Carol Gilligan and Nell Noddings introduced the ethics of care, emphasizing the moral significance of relationships, emotions, and context. The ethics of care highlights the limitations of rigid moral frameworks and offers a more nuanced approach to ethical decision-making. It has influenced fields ranging from healthcare and education to political theory and social justice. 3. Reimagining power and justice. The philosophy of power and justice has traditionally been dominated by male theorists, from Hobbes' views on the state to Rawls's theories of justice. However, contemporary female philosophers are offering new interpretations of power that move beyond hierarchical structures. Iris Marion Young introduced the concept of structural injustice, arguing that oppression is often embedded in societal institutions rather than being the result of individual wrongdoing. Catherine McKinnon revolutionized legal philosophy by applying feminist theory to issues of sexual harassment and gender inequality in the law. Angela Davis connected philosophy with activism, highlighting the ways in which race, class, and gender intersect in discussions of justice and freedom. These contributions are not mere additions to an existing conversation. They represent a fundamental rethinking of philosophy itself. Public philosophy, bringing thought into action. One of the most exciting shifts in contemporary philosophy is the movement towards public philosophy, an approach that takes philosophical ideas out of academic settings and into public discourse. Women philosophers are leading the charge in making philosophy more accessible, relevant, and action-oriented. Public philosophers engage with contemporary issues such as climate change, artificial intelligence, and human rights, ensuring that philosophy remains connected to the challenges of the modern world. Figures like Martha Nussbaum exemplify this approach by applying philosophical reasoning to real-world problems, advocating for policies that promote justice and human dignity. This model of engaged philosophy challenges the outdated notion that philosophy is an isolated discipline meant only for scholars. Conclusion: the narrative belongs to everyone. Reclaiming philosophy's narrative is not just about making room for women. It is about transforming the way we understand and engage with philosophy itself. Women have always been part of the intellectual tradition, and their contributions must be acknowledged, celebrated, and integrated into the larger philosophical discourse. By challenging the philosophical canon, expanding epistemology, and reimagining justice, women philosophers are proving that philosophy is not a closed system, but a living, evolving practice. The next generation of thinker queens will continue this transformation, ensuring that philosophy remains vibrant, inclusive, and relevant to the world we live in. The story of philosophy is still being written, and its narrative belongs to everyone. The Philosopher Queens. Chapter 8. The Future of Women in Philosophy. Philosophy has always been a discipline in motion, constantly reshaped by new voices, ideas, and challenges. While women have made significant inroads into the field, the journey toward full representation and influence is far from complete. The future of women in philosophy is about more than just inclusion. It is about transforming philosophy itself into a discipline that fully reflects the diversity of human experience. This chapter explores the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead, the role of education in shaping the next generation of female philosophers, and the impact of emerging technologies and global perspectives on philosophy's future. Breaking barriers, the ongoing struggle for representation. Despite progress, women remain underrepresented in philosophy. Studies show that while women now make up a larger portion of philosophy students than in previous decades, their numbers dwindle at the higher academic levels. Many philosophy departments are still overwhelmingly male-dominated, and women philosophers face biases that make it harder for them to secure tenured positions, gain recognition, and influence the broader discourse. Challenges women still face in philosophy. Implicit bias. Women philosophers often face unconscious biases that cause their work to be undervalued or overlooked compared to their male counterparts. Lack of mentorship. Fewer female senior philosophers mean that young women entering the field have fewer role models and mentors to guide them. Gatekeeping in academic publishing. Many prestigious philosophy journals have historically published fewer works by women, reinforcing gender disparities in academic recognition. Stereotypes and expectations. Women in philosophy are sometimes expected to focus on certain acceptable areas like ethics or feminist philosophy rather than being recognized as authorities in traditionally male-dominated fields such as metaphysics, logic, or political philosophy. Addressing these barriers is crucial to ensuring that philosophy does not remain stagnant, but continues to evolve with the contributions of diverse voices. The role of education shaping the next generation. Education is a powerful force in shaping the future of philosophy. If more women are to enter and thrive in the field, philosophy education at all levels must evolve to be more inclusive, supportive, and representative. 1. Expanding curricula to include more women philosophers. Traditional philosophy curricula have long prioritized the works of male thinkers, often relegating women philosophers to special topics courses rather than integrating their work into the core of philosophical study. Universities and schools must take a proactive approach in diversifying the curriculum to ensure that women's contributions are given the recognition they deserve. 2. Encouraging young women to pursue philosophy. One of the biggest barriers to women entering philosophy is the perception that it is not a field for them. More outreach programs, mentorship initiatives, and visibility of women philosophers in mainstream discourse can help dismantle this perception. Schools should introduce philosophy earlier in education, ensuring that girls have access to philosophical thinking from a young age. Female-led philosophy clubs, workshops, and mentorship programs can help create an environment where young women feel empowered to engage with philosophical thought. Media representation of women philosophers can also play a key role in inspiring the next generation. The intersection of philosophy and technology. The future of philosophy will be shaped not just by who participates in it, but also by how it interacts with emerging fields such as artificial intelligence, digital ethics, and global interconnectedness. Women philosophers have a vital role to play in these areas, ensuring that the philosophical implications of technological advancements are considered from diverse perspectives. 1. Women in digital and AI ethics. With the rise of AI and machine learning, ethical concerns about bias, decision-making, and privacy are more important than ever. Women philosophers like Shannon Valor and Kate Crawford have been at the forefront of discussions on AI ethics, ensuring that technological development aligns with human values. 2. Philosophy in the age of globalization. As the world becomes more interconnected, philosophy must expand beyond its Western roots and engage with diverse intellectual traditions. Women philosophers from non-Western backgrounds are increasingly bringing new perspectives that challenge and enrich traditional philosophical paradigms. African, indigenous, and Asian women philosophers are introducing new frameworks of thought that emphasize collective wisdom, sustainability, and relational ethics. This global expansion of philosophy will help break the Eurocentric dominance of the field and create a more holistic approach to understanding human existence. Public philosophy, bringing ideas to the masses. One of the most promising developments for the future of philosophy is the rise of public philosophy, bringing philosophical discourse beyond academia and into public life. Women philosophers are leading this movement by writing for mainstream audiences, engaging in public debates, and using digital platforms to make philosophy accessible to all. Popular books by female philosophers are reaching a wider audience, making philosophy more relatable and applicable to real-world issues. Social media, blogs, and podcasts have created new spaces for women philosophers to share their insights outside traditional academic settings. Public intellectuals like Martha Nussbaum have demonstrated that philosophy can and should engage with political and social realities, influencing policy and public opinion. Conclusion: a future of philosophical equality. The future of women in philosophy is one of transformation, resilience, and expansion. While challenges remain, the progress made so far shows that philosophy is slowly opening up to a more inclusive and dynamic approach. The path forward involves dismantling institutional barriers, reshaping education to reflect the full spectrum of human thought, and ensuring that philosophy engages with the pressing issues of our time. Women philosophers are not just participating in the field, they are redefining it. Philosophy will only reach its full potential when all voices are heard, and as we move forward, it is clear that the philosopher queens of today and tomorrow will continue to shape the course of human thought in ways that we are only beginning to understand. The Philosopher Queens. Chapter 9. The Philosopher Queens of Tomorrow. The next generation of female philosophers will not only inherit the rich intellectual traditions of the past, but will also redefine them, expanding the boundaries of philosophical inquiry. These philosopher queens of tomorrow will challenge established norms, introduce fresh perspectives, and ensure that philosophy remains relevant in an ever-changing world. In this chapter, we explore the role of the next wave of women philosophers, how they will reshape philosophical inquiry, and the importance of mentorship, accessibility, and global collaboration in fostering a more inclusive philosophical landscape. New frontiers in philosophy. The future of philosophy is not confined to its traditional branches. As emerging thinkers break new ground, the field will become increasingly interdisciplinary, integrating insights from science, technology, and social movements. Women philosophers will be at the forefront of these advancements, leading discussions on topics such as posthumanism and AI ethics, exploring the philosophical implications of artificial intelligence, robotics, and the evolution of human identity in a world driven by technology. climate ethics, and environmental philosophy, addressing the moral responsibilities of individuals, governments, and corporations in combating climate change and preserving biodiversity. Neuroscience and consciousness, investigating the nature of the mind, consciousness, and free will through the lens of neuroscience and cognitive science. Decolonizing philosophy, challenging Eurocentric narratives in philosophy, and incorporating indigenous, African, Asian, and Latin American thought traditions. Social and political philosophy in the digital age. Analyzing the effects of digital governance, misinformation, and surveillance on human rights and democracy. As these areas continue to develop, female philosophers will bring critical insights that challenge conventional wisdom and reshape how we think about the world. Mentorship and the cultivation of new thinkers. One of the key challenges for women in philosophy has been the lack of mentorship opportunities. A strong network of mentorship and support is crucial for ensuring that the next generation of women philosophers thrives. The importance of mentorship. Mentorship helps young philosophers navigate academia, refine their ideas, and gain access to publishing opportunities. Established female philosophers must take on the role of mentors, guiding the next generation and ensuring that they have the support needed to flourish. Creating mentorship networks, formal mentorship programs within universities, and independent initiatives can provide guidance and encouragement to young women entering the field. Fostering interdisciplinary collaboration. Encouraging cross-disciplinary mentorship allows women philosophers to engage with fields like science, politics, and technology, broadening their impact. Recognizing and promoting emerging voices, senior philosophers and institutions should actively promote and support the work of new thinkers, ensuring that they receive the recognition they deserve. Expanding access to philosophy. Philosophy has long been perceived as an elite discipline, often confined to academia. The next generation of female philosophers must work to make philosophy accessible to a broader audience. Breaking down barriers to entry. For philosophy to thrive, it must be open to people from all backgrounds. This requires dismantling the barriers that have historically prevented marginalized groups from engaging with philosophical thought. Affordable and open access education. Universities should provide free or low-cost philosophy courses to reach a broader demographic of students. Philosophy in schools. Introducing philosophy into school curricula at an earlier stage can help young girls develop critical thinking skills and an interest in philosophical inquiry. Digital platforms and public engagement, podcasts, blogs, YouTube channels, and online discussion forums can democratize access to philosophy, allowing new voices to participate in intellectual discourse without needing formal academic credentials. The globalization of philosophy. As the world becomes increasingly interconnected, the future of philosophy must embrace a global perspective. Women philosophers will play a crucial role in fostering cross-cultural dialogue and integrating diverse philosophical traditions into mainstream discourse. Philosophy beyond borders. engaging with non-Western traditions. The next generation of female philosophers will continue to challenge the dominance of Western thought by integrating insights from non-Western traditions. Multilingual philosophy, expanding philosophical discussions beyond the English language, will allow for a richer exchange of ideas and perspectives. Global collaborative networks, building international communities of philosophers, will create a more inclusive and diverse philosophical landscape. Leading the way, the Philosopher Queens of tomorrow. Women philosophers of the future will not only shape academic discourse, but will also influence politics, technology, ethics, and culture. The impact of their ideas will extend beyond university lecture halls and into the fabric of society itself. The Philosopher Queens of tomorrow will challenge institutional biases, reshaping philosophy to be more inclusive and representative of diverse experiences. Engage in activism and policy making, bringing philosophical insights into real-world decision-making processes. Transform philosophy into a living, evolving practice, ensuring that philosophy remains relevant to contemporary issues and future challenges. Conclusion: a new era of philosophical thought. The future of women in philosophy is bright. As new thinkers enter the field, they will carry forward the legacy of those who paved the way while forging new paths of their own. The next generation of women philosophers will not merely inherit philosophy, they will transform it, ensuring that it speaks to the needs of all people, regardless of gender, culture, or background. The time for change is now. The philosopher queens of tomorrow are rising, and their voices will shape the world in ways we can only begin to imagine. The Philosopher Queens. Chapter 10. A Call to Action. An Open Letter to Martha Nussbaum. The Legacy of a Living Philosopher Queen. Dear Martha Nussbaum, this book would not be complete without recognizing the impact you have had on philosophy, on the world, and on me personally. Your work has been a guiding light for many, illuminating the intersections of philosophy, ethics, politics, and human flourishing. You have paved the way for women in philosophy, not simply by existing in the field, but by transforming it with your intellect, dedication, and moral courage. It is in the spirit of your work that I write this letter, not merely as a reflection of the past, but as an invitation to shape the future. Throughout this book, I have explored the struggles and triumphs of women in philosophy, the barriers they face, and the new frontiers they must conquer. But at the heart of it all is a simple truth. We need more philosopher queens, and we need those who have led the way to continue their role in inspiring and mentoring those who come after them. Martha, you have already cemented your legacy as one of the greats. You have championed the role of philosophy in human development, in democracy, in education, and in the arts. You have shown the world that philosophy is not merely an abstract exercise, but a force that shapes policy, reforms institutions, and defends human dignity. This is precisely the kind of philosophy that the world needs more of. The need for more philosopher queens. As we move forward into an uncertain future, the role of women in philosophy becomes even more vital. The world is in desperate need of wisdom, wisdom that understands justice beyond the confines of law, that sees human development beyond GDP, and that understands freedom not merely as an absence of oppression, but as the presence of flourishing. You have articulated these ideas beautifully throughout your career, and I believe that the next generation of Philosopher Queens must carry this torch forward. Philosophy must not remain an insular academic exercise. It must engage with the world, challenge injustice, and inspire new ways of thinking. The Philosopher Queens of tomorrow must not be bound by the limitations of traditional academia. They must be free to create, to explore, and to expand the boundaries of knowledge itself. A personal invitation to you. Martha, I extend to you a sincere and open invitation to collaborate, to share ideas, and to build something greater than what either of us could achieve alone. The philosophy of emergence, a framework that I have dedicated my life to developing, seeks to explore how knowledge, meaning, and governance naturally evolve through dynamic interaction rather than rigid structures. In many ways, it aligns with your vision of a philosophy that is alive, that breathes, and that shapes the world rather than merely describing it. I have dedicated myself to making philosophy accessible, to bridging the gap between academic thought and public discourse, and to creating a space where knowledge is not hoarded but shared. My work is freely available to all at wendellsdiary.com, and I would be honored if you took the time to explore it. I believe there is great potential for synergy between our work, and perhaps a chance to inspire the next wave of Philosopher Queens together. The path forward. The world will not wait for philosophy to catch up. It demands action, engagement, and voices that can guide humanity through the crises and transformations of our time. If we are to see a future where women in philosophy are not exceptions but the norm, we must act now. We must mentor, support, and uplift those who are just beginning their journey. We must create spaces where philosophical thought is encouraged, where critical thinking is nurtured, and where no voice is dismissed simply because it does not fit the traditional mold of the discipline. I call upon all Philosopher Queens, those who are already leading, and those who are still finding their voices, to stand up, to speak, and to shape the world with their wisdom. And Martha, I call upon you, one of the greatest Philosopher Queens of our time, to continue leading, mentoring, and inspiring. This is more than a letter. It is an appeal, a challenge, and a recognition of all that you have done and all that you still can do. The world is listening. Let's make sure it hears us loud and clear. With the deepest respect and admiration, Wendell.